challenges of the National Advertising Division. When a competitor's claims are unsubstantiated, I see them bringing challenges at the National Advertising Division. So if we started late, I think we had a little bit of a juggled start. So I'm just trying to welcome you here today and introduce you to our panelists. Sarah Bruno, a partner at Reed Smith, Nancy Felsten, a partner at Davis Wright Tremaine, and Jennifer Santos, an attorney with our National Advertising Division. We are bringing you three experts in advertising law who combined have well over 50 years of experience. Sarah and Nancy both counsel beauty brands large and small and bring challenges at the National Advertising Division. I know you will learn a lot from listening to them today. For many of you, we're at our first beauty series 2 days ago on clean beauty. So I'm not going to repeat my remarks from that day. But I do want to say that the core of what we do at BBB National Programs is trying to help businesses build trust through our advertising, privacy, and dispute resolution, independent self-regulatory programs. We want to be a resource for you as you work to build trust with your consumers. The National Advertising Division was founded over 50 years ago by the advertising industry as a way to help advertisers, like many of you on this call, build trust with consumers. What we do is we provide a meaningful way for competitors, industry associations, consumer groups to raise the bar for truth in advertising by holding advertising to consistent standards that are set by the Federal Trade Commission primarily. The way this works is that a business or an advocacy organization or even NAD itself can bring a challenge to advertising claims if we find them to be unsubstantiated. And we hold that advertising to standards that are set by the FTC. It's a litigation-like process without discovery. Each side gets 2 submissions and then meets with NAD, and ultimately we render a decision. Although our decisions and compliance with them is completely voluntary, the FTC has shown 50 plus years of support for self-regulation because we do help expand on their work. And we are increasingly working with platforms. Both FTC and platforms will take referrals from us and review the advertising in question to make sure it does in fact comply with established truth in advertising principles. But today, more than ever, building a trusted relationship with consumers is important. Right now, with the growth of digital advertising and consumers really understanding the power of advertising to influence their purchases, consumers are trying to learn more about what they're purchasing and learn more about the brands that they're purchasing with. And so we want this webinar to be a resource for you to help build a more trusted relationship with consumers. We also hope that you'll look at our online archive of case decisions and bring challenges to misleading advertising in the marketplace so that altogether we can help build trust in advertising. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, Nancy, and Sarah. And I trust that you will learn a lot from this presentation today. And if you miss any of it, we will be sending a recording of it out by email in the next week or so. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you with us for this hour that we're together. Nancy, Sarah, and I are going to cover the following. First, we'll talk about claim substantiation, why it's necessary. Next, we'll walk through what makes an ad deceptive. Then we'll move on to steps brands can take to identify its claims and develop substantiation for those claims. We will then identify and dig deeper into 4 common substantiation issues NAD has recently seen in the beauty industry. We've created hypothetical beauty ads with the intention of creating a lively and meaningful discussion on these important topics. And finally, we will end with best practices that brands should use to substantiate their beauty claims. We hope to leave some time for questions. So if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A section. I'm not sure if it's on the top or bottom of your screen. I think it depends. And we will try to answer them. So let's get started. Why substantiate your beauty claims anyway? Well, it's required by law. Both federal and state laws apply to advertising claims. The FTC Act prohibits unfair or deceptive acts or practices and requires that advertisers be able to substantiate all reasonable interpretations of their express and implied claims before they disseminate their advertising. Each state also regulates advertising, both with general consumer protection statutes and statutes that regulate specific practices. such as the regulation of sweepstakes and contests. Another reason to support your claims is to avoid competitive suits or class actions. Oftentimes, if a competitor wants to challenge your claims, they will attempt to contact you first about their concerns. If your claims are properly substantiated, you can substantively respond to any inquiries from a competitor and potentially avoid competitive lawsuits and class actions. Some other incentives for substantiating your claims are to establish trust with consumers and help maintain customer loyalty. An added benefit of truthful advertising, especially for the personal care, beauty, and wellness industry, is to garner consumer trust, particularly from a younger generation of consumers who have a lifetime of buying power and choice ahead of them. By truthfully advertising to consumers and holding other beauty brands to the same standards, as both established and newer brands can protect and build brand loyalty with young consumers that can hopefully last a lifetime as your customers. And if those reasons aren't enough, it's simply the right thing to do. So what are the risks of misleading advertising claims? There's a risk of action by the FTC, a state attorney general, or other regulatory body for misleading advertising claims. The cosmetics and beauty industry are no strangers to class action lawsuits, with many consumers taking legal action over alleged misleading advertising claims. Competitors can also bring a federal suit for false advertising claims under the Lanham Act or other state-specific consumer protection statutes. And competitors also have the option of bringing a challenge to the NAD or other self-regulatory bodies, such as the Direct Selling Self-Regulatory Council, or DSSRC. All of these challenges I just mentioned are costly to defend and deplete company resources. And of course, perhaps one of the most concerning risks is the damage to your brand reputation that a misleading advertising claim can cause. So Nancy and Sarah, are any of these risks top of mind for your clients?
So of course they are. I guess, obviously, we are always looking to work with our clients to understand and assess the risk-reward proposition. And you can't do that without understanding the claims and the risks behind them and the regulatory bodies that may be looking for enforcement. So basic, and obviously also the competitive risk, which is something often the client knows better than we do. So in the personal care space in particular, there are lots of hot button concerns for the FTC and for the NAD and its self-monitoring capacity in particular, which surrounds in particular health-related claims, which we're seeing more and more of and all the time. So we consider them, we analyze them closely, and we ask questions. Well, is this below the radar? How close to the line is this? Is this likely to get a regulator's ire or attention? Are you the kind of advertiser, big or small, and there are different reasons for either, that the regulators may be interested in pursuing? The idea is that if you're going to come close or even over the line, at least understand if you're presenting yourself as a big target or a small one. And the likelihood, as best we can tell, that somebody is going to come after you.
Yeah, and I'll jump in on that as well. I know I'm here in California, and I know routinely we are subject to demands under the California Consumer Legal Remedy Act, the CLRA. Essentially, that's a law here in California that a lot of class action attorneys and attorneys rely upon to make claims related to false advertising or fraudulent business practices, which unfortunately often involves a lot of the claims in the beauty and health industry in particular. And I think the biggest risk is obviously they tie it to the unfair competition law here in California. So we get a class action demand associated with it, but they're often not focused just online. Often these claims, because they're specific to California, are product packaging and claims that are, effective and performance-based that are actually printed in retail locations and on packaging. So it can be, it's one that anyone that's doing business in California should be aware of, but in particular, if you've got things in print here in California, the damages that you can get under the CLRA are quite broad, punitive, restitution, injunction. Like I said, they can be a demand for reprinting, removing packaging. And again, it can be tied to a class action as well.
California is always a country unto itself.
You're getting there in New York, Nancy. Come on.
Yeah, we're not even close. In any case.
Let's talk about, Nancy, the types of statements that raise concerns.
So this is actually a lot harder than it might look. And why? Because everyone is wedded to what they meant to say, what they intend to say, what they think they actually said, as opposed to what the consumer might take away from what's been said. And that's the key. So when you're looking at your advertising and you're looking at the claims that you are developing and that you need to substantiate, consider every permutation. Consider the express and the implied. Express is easy, sort of. ABC mouthwash prevents colds. That is an express claim that the product will prevent colds. But an implied claim is indirect. It's more about an inference. ABC mouthwash kills the germs that causes colds. Well, arguably, that's an implied claim that the product will prevent colds as well. Context is likely to tell you whether it is or isn't, and you really need to step away and think about it. Would a reasonable consumer conclude that kills germs that cause colds is a statement that the product will actually prevent colds? The key is also, with respect to what you're telling consumers, to think about the things you aren't saying and how much they matter. Are they material? So you've got a claim that says, we're going to send you a collection of books, but you don't mention that they're abridged. So that's missing information that is material, that matters to the consumers. And without it, you've left a misimpression about your product and what they're going to get. And then there's my favorite, literally true, but impliedly false. Okay, a claim that X product kills roaches, and you have a demonstration of the roaches that it actually killed. Perfect, what's the problem? Well, actually, that product kills Brazilian roaches. And so the manufacturer imported Brazilian ones, flew them in, used them in the demo, and voila, a literally truthful statement, but impliedly false, because it doesn't kill the American roaches that people will think it does. That brings us back to demonstrations. They have to be truthful. They have to be accurate. Think about mashed potatoes instead of ice cream for an ice cream ad. That's fine if you're talking about the taste of the ice cream. But if you're focused on its creamy texture, don't show potatoes when you're talking about the texture of ice cream.
Excellent. Now let's talk about what makes an ad deceptive.
Sure. This is one that is quite, by the book with the two things that we have to think about with deception. First is whether it's material. And when you're thinking about material, to the point that Nancy just made, if you're purchasing ice cream and it's a really compelling visual and it's the main visual that you see, and it happens to be mashed potatoes instead, we have to think through, is that going to be material to the consumer because it's this huge picture and it's the first thing that you see, one, but then two, is it misleading? And so that's the second component of it, the M&M, material and misleading. And the misleading part, to Nancy's point, would be if you're talking about buy our ice cream because it's got the best texture, or it's one that'll last for a long time at the party, or whatever it may be. That would be a material claim, and it's misleading if the image itself is something else. It comes up in the beauty industry all the time with lasts long. I've had situations where the marketing team was really excited about an image of someone in a pool wearing some cosmetics, and the product hadn't been tested to determine if it's waterproof or not. So we have to think through that, the implied message there, whether it's material and misleading. Who's responsible? Essentially, everyone can be responsible. The brand, certainly, and that's typically the best target for, as we said, a lot of these regulators, but also class action attorneys as well, because that's going to be the deepest pocket. But there's also agencies, there's influencers, there's potential celebrity endorsers. We see, on our side, Nancy and I see letters across the board related to what these brands are doing and who's responsible for it. And essentially, at the end of the day, everyone should have agreements in place, because everyone that's associated with that ad could be responsible if it's deemed to be deceptive.
So now let's talk a little further about how we identify claims. So step one is to actually identify claims. And as Nancy mentioned before, it's important that we consider our claims from all angles. Advertisers are obligated to support all messages reasonably conveyed, including ones they did not intend to convey. So it's not a defense to say, oh, but I didn't mean to say that. So you want to ask yourself, is the advertising technically true, but potentially misleading? Watch out for the juxtaposition of words and pictures. They might convey an implied claim that maybe you didn't intend and maybe you don't have support for. So how do we determine the message reasonably conveyed to the consumer? At the NAD, we look at the overall net impression of the ad, not words or phrases standing alone. And the FTC takes the same approach. And then if there's not consumer perception evidence available that speaks to the message conveyed from the advertisement, NAD and the FTC both step into the shoes of the reasonable consumer. So for example, in NAD's Smile Direct Club case, in number 7091, the advertiser claimed that their Bright On tooth whitening product was 3 times faster to use than Crest white strips. The challenge advertising featured the claim 3 times faster to use, alongside claims of premium whitening and brightest bright smile, which impliedly speaks to the efficacy of Bright On's product. NAD found that while the 3 times faster to use claim may have been literally true, due to the Smile Direct's wear time of 10 minutes versus Crest white strips wear time of 30 minutes, in context, the comparison to Crest white strips, that's known for their teeth whitening capabilities, reasonably conveyed a message of equivalency of tooth whitening outcomes that Smile Direct Club was required to support. So this is a great example of why it's important to consider your claims from all angles. Now let's get a little
Can I just throw one quick point in there?
Of course,
you
of course.
mentioned, Jen, consumer perception evidence and how NAD and FTC step in the shoes of the consumer in the absence of it. And I just want to remind everybody, consumer perception evidence is a science. Some might say it's an art and a science, it is. But what it's not is a focus group study. And so funny thing about those focus groups that are conducted early on when you're testing out your advertising, your claims, they tend to hurt you if you're in litigation, not at NAD because you don't produce them, but in litigation, they will show that consumers are taking away more often than not the claim you say you're not making. So be careful of them. But separately, if I happen to support your interpretation, that's not the kind of evidence that's going to work either in court or at the FTC or with the NAD. For that, you need a good consumer perception evidence test by a third-party independent consumer perception test company. Okay, sorry, go on.
And that's why we do not see them very often. So now let's get into more specific categories of claims that may require enhanced scrutiny or an elevated level of support. Nancy, can you guide us through some of these special claims?
Yes, I will try to do it relatively quickly. So we've talked a bit about express and implied claims, and the trick there is substantiation. So I'm just going to move past those and talk a little bit about establishment claims and dermatologist or doctor recommended claims. And by the way, sensory claims are establishment claims too. But what's an establishment claim? It's a claim where consumers will understand that that claim has been in some way clinically proven or proven by a series of tests or otherwise. It is a higher level of support that's necessary, and you don't have to use the phrase clinically proven or tests proved to make it into an establishment claim, at least at NAD. Courts are a little bit different, but it depends. Regardless, that kind of a claim, again, high standard of proof, because you're promising the consumer that there's evidence, scientific evidence that proves or establishes the truth of the claim. Think about the phrase clinically proven. It literally speaks to the actual testing of the product in terms of its efficacy. NAD has traditionally required that advertisers produce reliable, well-controlled clinical testing on the advertising product that can be verified to substantiate the establishment claim. The FTC has actually tried at times to require 2 such well-controlled clinical studies for some kind of claims, in particular, health claims. Those are held to a higher standard than maybe some other kinds of claims. NAD doesn't have a rigid number requirement, but it does focus obviously on the quality, the consumer relevance, the reliability of the study to support the claim. Dermatologist reco claims are also tests. These are survey-based claims, and you have to be really, really careful. You have an appropriate sampling of docs and that they blessed your product or recommend your product at number 1. The catch is that claims can be narrow. X face cream is the number 1 dermatologist recommended claim. They can be a little broader, number 1 recommended for overnight hydration, or much broader, like the one on the screen here, dermatologist recommended brand of skincare. Just make sure that your testing is asking the doctors the relevant question to make the claim. They need to match. If you say why you recommend X, Y, and Z product, get the answer, or you can't advertise it in your advertising. Sarah, you get the qualified, quantified, preference, sensory, go for it.
Yep. So similar to what Nancy said, I think with respect to these claims, you do have to look, one, at each of the claims themselves. A quantified claim is one where you actually have a number associated with whatever the performance-based attribute you're recommending or touting in your advertisement. So here we have 85%. You'd want to make sure that there's no rounding. That's something in particular that I know brands like to, consider doing, but you want to make sure there's no rounding. I like to see, especially, and we're going to get into context in a little bit in some of our case examples, but certainly the first thing I think with all three of these claims is that we have to consider the context. Here, consumers saw 85% reduction in fine lines after 1 week of use. We'd want to think through, make sure that test, I'd love it if it was by independent third party, but certainly because it says consumers saw, I'm sure Nancy would agree that we have companies that would have consumer preference testing that they would like to use to support this. I know the NAD might not love that. And again, if there's some compelling images, the NAD would love it less. But maybe a disclaimer will help, and we're going to talk about some of those tips, but certainly, best practice is to have that testing data that supports that number, and it supports the exact claim you're made, and it's consumer relevant the way the testing's been done. Preference claim, I think the big thing here is preferring over what. You want to make sure if you have a preference claim that you're actually testing against something. And frankly, if you're not saying what, it's everything. And so you have to think through apples to apples, making sure you've compared that claim or that product against similarly sold and situated products that have the same performance that you're advertising. And if you don't, you should again explain that in some part of the advertisement as to what the preference is. If it's just a simple statement like this, you better have that testing against all apples to apples products. And similar with the comparative claim itself, here we have leading brand. I'm sure this comes up all the time. What makes the brand leading? What data are we looking at? Is this industry specific and reputable sources, or is this your internal sales data that you've cobbled together based on some online research? The leading brand is going to be a risk for you. So when you're making a claim like this, back to the beginning of this presentation, where you're not only thinking of the NAD and you're thinking of whatever potential challenges you have just from class action attorneys, you should be thinking about that leading brand and whether this gives them enough ammo to challenge you for this claim.
This is literally a slide we could spend probably 2 hours on and not even begin to cover. So
exactly.
This is the meat of what you need. How you do it is not in here, but what you need to think about, this is the meat of it. If you take nothing else away from today.
Yeah, and I think on that point, just making sure that I know we could talk about each of these claims and argue and debate them with the NAD for some time as to what's required. And I hope that that's helpful for the audience to understand that there's really, even though the NAD has things that they look for, Nancy and my job is to help you make sure that what claims you're making are supported by what you have.
Great point.
And
so
we're
now
willing
we've
to disagree
identified
with the NAD.
Say that again.
We're willing to disagree with the NAD. We fight hard.
And we're willing to listen to all of your arguments. So step 3. So now we've identified all our claims. And now how do we go about developing claim substantiation? Well, this was mentioned, and you'll see there's a rhyme and rhythm, right, to everything that we're saying. And number 1 is consider the target audience. All advertising starts from the perspective of the reasonable consumer. If your target audience is different, then consider that perspective. For example, if your advertising is a brochure directed towards doctors, consider how the expert audience would interpret or understand the claims. Remember, while professionals may be more adept at deciphering results of clinical data, even sophisticated professionals are entitled to advertising that's truthful, accurate, and non-misleading. And remember, any claims made to a vulnerable population would be subject to a higher level of scrutiny and would require substantiation in the form of strong clinical data that's specifically pertinent to the intended population. Then consider the nature of the claim. As we said before in the past slide, the type of claim determines the type of substantiation required. If the advertising speaks to the specific level of support, such as studies show, the advertiser must actually have that substantiation. I won't go through here the health and safety and clinically proven claims because we already did that. And the last thing that you really should consider is that consumer expectations and net takeaway should be central to developing your methodology to test your products. It's important to consider all possible takeaways of the claim so that your substantiation is complete.
Quick point about those number one claims, because we see them all the time. They are also contextual. Number one can mean a lot of different things. It can be efficacy, it can be performance, it can be sales. Be really clear which it is. Obviously, those are different claims with different support, but you'd be amazed how often advertisers kind of miss that it has multi-meanings.
Correct. And I think, what we're saying here, and I'm going to throw this to you, Nancy and Sarah, to speak to the more specific considerations, but there needs to be a good fit between your substantiation and the claim you are trying to make. You might have the best substantiation and it might be a well-developed clinical that hits all the proper points. But if you're making a claim that goes beyond that evidence, that's where there can be a problem.
Yeah.
So Nancy and Sarah, let's speak to more specific considerations when developing claim substantiation.
Sarah, you were starting.
Yeah, no, I was going to start, but I think we keep moving just on that note in particular, but I think it can come up again later, the point I was about to make. Okay, so I think for here, we want to just spend a minute talking about the substantiation and the thoughts behind it. I know that I often see studies after they've been completed. And unfortunately, sometimes when there's a demand letter, I see them after they've been completed, and I realize that they were done some time before potentially a claim was made. So in a perfect world, you have your marketing team directly with the third party that's preparing the evidence in the study, and that the third party is educated for the claims and the product attributes we want to make sure we're marketing, and that they understand those attributes, and that's what they're testing. That's not often the case. And I think the next section of this, the fundamental product testing, gets to some of those issues we see. Nancy.
And here too, we could spend all day on these points. So again, take this slide away with you. You'll have it. Just think about it, but just make sure you tested the products at issue, not old versions, not other versions, not bits and pieces of them. Can you actually draw a line between the test and the results? Because if you're, as Jen just said, if your claim is not a good fit for the test, you don't have very much there. Did you actually test the claim you're looking for? Or did you test something else? Do you want to talk about vision, but you actually asked questions about comfort? Well, guess what? You can't make claims about vision. And then, of course, you get to, is the methodology sound? Is it relevant to consumers? Did you design it in a way that is not just about some kind of exploratory clinical aspect of a product, but actually for sufficient to substantiate a real claim about it? And what kind of test did you use? Standard? Proprietary. If there is an industry standard, you're going to have to explain why you chose a proprietary instead. Lots of reasons why you might, but you need to understand what they are and have that all sort of lined up for you.
And then I'll just jump in really quick, repeatable. So making sure that it wasn't just luck. You should make sure whatever results you've gotten are repeatable. I think we can move to the next slide.
And I think the next slide here talks about NAD's approach to claim review, which is, what are the message reasonably conveyed? Remember, again, strength of the claim drives the level of support. Just something important to point out here, if you're not familiar with the NAD, is that the initial burden is on the advertiser to provide a reasonable basis for the claim. The burden then shifts to the challenger to produce stronger, more persuasive evidence, or to poke, fatal flaws in the advertiser's evidence. So that's different than litigation, and just something important to note. But for now, we're going to move on to the fun part of the webinar, where we get to talk about some hypothetical ads that we've created. So I picked 4 common substantiation issues that NAD has recently been seeing in the beauty industry. We're going to focus on performance quantified claims, objective and subjective claims, comparison to medical procedures, and before and after claims. So let's move on. This is our first hypothetical here. And the first issue we're going to tackle is performance or quantified claims. We have two separate hypothetical ads here. So looking at the first ad on the left of your screen, Sarah, is the product name 5-second wrinkle remover serum itself a claim? If so, what would you want to support that claim?
Yes, it's a claim, and it's a very scary claim, because if it's the name of the product, it's going to be on every bottle. So I would want very strong evidence to support that this product actually removes wrinkles within 5 seconds. Third-party testing, strong testing, and frankly, the word remove and 5 seconds to me would be incredibly difficult to establish consistently and repeatably. So, you know, this would be a really tough one, but that's what I'd like to see.
Mm-hmm. And then let's talk about visibly decreases wrinkles by 80%. A lot of times you'll see this visibly, right, decreases something or visibly increases moisture, or we see this a lot in ads. You know, what would you want to support a claim like this? Is it objective? Is it subjective? What would be your gold standard?
This is objective. Visibly decreases would be extremely difficult, I think, to establish consistently. I don't know what 80% is of what. I don't know where this product goes. So at this point, it could go anywhere, or we could be talking about around the eyes or whatever it may be. So from my standpoint, visibly decreases wrinkles by 80%. Would be extremely difficult just to substantiate, even with a good test, because I'd have to, you know, with the word visibly decrease, I think we're going to need a disclaimer of some point if the client was really stuck on this, to explain how many, what was tested, how many, where. Certainly all of those factors would be considered.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Now, so the ad on your right, Nancy, I'm going to throw this to you. This is for the same product. We are not going to talk about the natural and organic claims that are here on the right, because we've talked about that in our beauty webinar the other day. But there is a claim here in a clinical study of 96% of women showed improvement in skin's tone, radiance, and texture with this product. And there's a disclaimer here, clinical study, and I might add, it is pretty clear and conspicuous, a clinical study with 10 people after 8 weeks. So, I mean, I guess my first question for you, Nancy, is what if your marketing team came to you with this ad? You know, can this claim be made based on a clinical conducted on 10 people?
It is so interwoven with what the claim actually is, but let me just say, 10 is really few. It's not impossible. I have lots of questions about it. Who were the 10? How were they chosen? Was there any diversity in age and in ethnicity and where they might live? Hard to do with 10 people. Were there multiple sites? 10 people's tough. If the question is, and I think that's part of what you're saying, well, if I tell people it's 10 people, is that good enough? That is a super interesting question. And again, depends on context, but it is possible that you could make a claim that you're telling the audience is not big and broad enough to be the whole projectable to the population at large. You could conceivably be saying, we tested this on 10 people and we determined some following, maybe you'd want to use softer language, preliminary results, but there might be a way to make a claim front and center, not in a disclosure that's only about 10 people. So it's possible. I will say that this claim is actually, I don't know how it's being assessed. It's kind of a soft claim. I mean, it just says women showed improvement in tone, radiance, and texture. It's not quantified. That makes it easier. However, I don't actually know what the heck this means, how much improvement is necessary in order for there to be some kind of not only statistically significant improvement, but one that's material, or we call it clinically relevant, something consumers can actually see. How do you even define tone, radiance, and texture? Was there expert grading here, or did consumers just kind of say, yeah, I showed an improvement? I don't have any idea what happened here. if we use language like women saw or women perceived an improvement, that might be easier to substantiate. But again, 10 people in that case, you can never project to a larger audience. So I think some of this is sit with the client, talk about the level of risk they're willing to take. Where is this claim, as Sarah just alluded to, going? If it's on the bottle, that's a big time problem. If it's just in social media, well, maybe we can talk about it because you can take it down more easily. Doesn't make it right if the claim's not supported, but the intensity with which you scrutinize the support may have something to do with where the claim ultimately appears. So this one is, I mean, 10 people, it's hard to imagine working for much of anything.
I'll
There you
just
have
jump in really quick because I actually saw a question about the disclaimer and if the what some tips for the disclaimer. The disclaimer here is bolstering and explaining more about the claim itself. But if the disclaimer were to contradict it or have or say the clinical study with 10 people after 8 weeks showed less wrinkles, and yet it's supposed to be under the improvement in skin tone, radiance, and texture, that would be a problem because it's essentially saying we tested something else, but we wanted to use this claim. So the disclaimer should bolster the claim. It shouldn't contradict it or make it appear misleading.
And I think like Nancy made a very good point there that you're talking about 10 people. There might be a claim there, but maybe if you want to talk about the 10 people, you should put it in the main part of the claim and not as part of a disclaimer. So it could be something to consider.
Right, to augment what Sarah just said, obviously a disclaimer can't counter the claim, but if it's material to understanding the claim, it doesn't belong in the disclaimer either. It can explain, but it can't be something so important that you otherwise without it, don't understand the claim.
So just some very quick performance claim takeaways. Is the test consumer relevant? Is the test reliable and repeatable? These are all things that we've really talked about before. Just one thing I want to mention on here is, did the advertiser provide NAD sufficient information to evaluate the results of the test? I mean, I said NAD here, this could apply to many different things, but at NAD specifically, it's very important that you provide us with as much information about your testing as possible, your test protocol, your complete methodology, so that we can really assess the reliability of the information. And then, is there an industry standard test? We haven't really talked about that too much. If there is, was it followed? If it wasn't, why not? I think if it wasn't followed for the NAD, that's not a complete failure, but we need to know why. So very often expert reports helping to explain your testing, I know in NAD's case, can be extremely helpful. Now let's talk about a quick case example here. Sarah, you want to handle this quickly?
Sure. Yeah, I'll move through this quickly. So the claim itself here, this was Benefit Cosmetics challenged Too Faced Cosmetics. The claim that was at issue was 1,944% more volume in this mascara. Quick points on this. The claim itself is a very strong one, but when you add the before and after pictures on the packaging and the other percentage claims, it's extremely strong and it's printed on every package. So then, when we're looking at the challenge here, we think about what testing do they have to support. Too Faced had testing, and we can move to the next slide on this. They did have testing. The testing was by a micrometer, which is essentially a caliper that tests each of the lashes. They had lashes that were displayed just physically without it being actually on a human, so in vitro testing. And while they were real lashes, the micrometer was a problem. And I actually worked on this case. So we spent a lot of time looking at the micrometer and it's essentially a caliper. And the support that was submitted for the micrometer was that the FDA had language saying that this was sufficient, but the FDA's language said that a micrometer is often used to test the distance between different parts of the skeleton. So much bigger than eyelashes. It was also a textbook was supported to show that micrometers are good ways to test things, but that textbook actually said centimeters versus millimeters of distance. And then finally, the testing lab itself had submitted information saying that they typically use micrometers to test volume claims related to eyelashes, But to Jennifer's point, this wasn't deemed to be, you know, an industry standard because it was just one independent body that said that that's what they do. So there was really no industry standard, and the in vitro testing and the nature of the test, and given the scope of this claim, the NAD found there wasn't sufficient evidence to support it.
Great. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, which is objective versus subjective claims. I have verses here, but it's not like really one versus the other. It's just that there's objective claims where again, looking from the consumer's point of view, they are expecting objective testing with maybe instrumentation or that gives actual results, versus subjective claims, which are maybe in the beauty industry, that would be claims where the consumer is talking about how the product makes them feel, or how it feels on their skin, or how it looks on their skin, how it appears. So here it's important to note, I think, that so NAD can also bring its monitoring cases as part of its not-for-profit mission. We also do our own monitoring cases, and we look to maybe claims that are out in the industry, and then we will bring a case saying that we would like to challenge this claim, just like an advertiser would challenge a claim. So we looked at what is out in the beauty industry, and we've been seeing a lot of this lately. An ad, as you can see your ad to the right of your screen, with these clinical results really as part of the ad. They're listed either on product web pages or on retailer web pages that are selling products. So here we have XYZ hydration cream, and it provides all-day hydration, and 95% of users agree that their skin felt nourished. Again, we're going to leave the pure natural claims because we dealt with those in our clean beauty webinar a few days ago. And here there's some clinical results that the advertiser is touting: a clinical test on 30 subjects. After 4 weeks of use, 90% experienced improved skin texture and 85% experienced improved skin hydration. And then there's a consumer perception study that the advertiser touts: 30 subjects, 4 weeks of use, 100% agreed the product kept them hydrated all day long, 8 hours, and 95% agree their skin felt replenished and nourished. So Nancy, I'm going to throw this to you first. In looking at this ad, do you view provides all-day hydration as an objective or subjective claim? And what kind of support are you looking to support this claim? And from what you can tell here, I know you don't know details, but from what you can tell here, do these clinical results support the claim?
Oh my, okay, there's a lot there. So first, I'm going to ignore the stuff on the left and just look at provides all-day hydration, because you just asked me that. And yes, I believe provides all-day hydration is an objective claim. That means it's got to be supported by some kind, ignoring the quantified results for a moment, some kind of objective study. It can be measured by an instrument. Hydration can, so it should be. How is it objectively measured? I need to know about geographic and other diversity, such as ethnic diversity of those in this study. They're obviously depicted in the ad, all kinds of different skin. I'd need to know the exclusion and the inclusion criteria. Was there a washout period where no moisturizers were used? Did the women wash their face with a gentle cleanser in the testing center, which was provided, let's say, by the manufacturer? Did the study technician apply this miracle cream, which I'm running out to buy? And then what? Wait around, have them leave, come back in 8 hours? There's a great deal I need to know, but in answer to your question, yes, it's an objective claim. As for those clinical results, 30 subjects, well, that's possible. If though they were diverse in the ways I just described and the test was conducted in the way I just described, maybe you can do a clinical 4 weeks of use, 30 subjects. I'm not sure where you get all-day hydration out of that. What I need to know here is about, I don't know what experienced improved skin texture means. I don't know if that's the consumers gave you their opinion, or there's some kind of expert review or use of cameras to look at their skin texture and study it. I don't know if that's a material difference or just a statistically significant one. I don't know anything about improved skin hydration. Well, enough to matter. if you put moisturizer on, you will have improved skin hydration. When was that taken? When was that studied? At hour 1, at hour 5, at hour 8, at week 1, at week 2, at week 4. There's a lot I need to know in order to match it up with the claims.
I think at NAD, when we see provides all day hydration, that is an objective claim. I would agree with you. And I think that just looking at these clinical results that the advertiser is touting, I have some concerns as to whether there's true all day hydration, right? All day hydration, I think there's obviously some question of what that means. Does it mean 5 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours? But here, if you're just saying that in the clinical portion of the study, 85% of people experience skin hydration, whatever that means, as you pointed out, there's many questions, but I think that there's some concern of whether or not it would be all day hydration. So again, just pointing out that, right, it's very important that your clinical results, which you might have a great test, that your claim doesn't go beyond whatever your test results are. So moving over to the second claim, 95% of users agree their skin felt nourished. So Sarah, this is a subjective claim, and how do you feel generally about a consumer perception study to support a claim like this?
So the claim itself, and what we have here, I'm more comfortable with the consumer perception. I know the NAD may not be, just because it's such a strong claim. Here, the other parts that I think are compelling is it's all day hydration, it's all day hydration, and we say skin felt nourished. So the two together, again, the context really matters. Saying your skin felt nourished and then tying that in close proximity to all day hydration, there's a implied message there that it's going to feel nourished all day. So that's something that we would consider with this claim. But the claim in a vortex, and Jennifer, you probably don't agree with me, but I would be more comfortable with the consumer perception study as support for this if I had looked at the study. The other things I think about, though, is diversity. We have diverse models here. Geography, which I know Nancy already mentioned, but if this is a claim, for Arizona versus another part of America, there's a different level of what you need to hydrate your skin in different parts of the US. And certainly as far as time of year, that also matters. When this claim's being made would also come up when the test was done. So yes, I could get comfortable with the consumer perception, but I would want to have a bunch of those boxes checked before we went green lighted this.
And I would agree that consumer perception generally, I think, can support a claim like this. I think where I have questions is that this appears just from these results. Hopefully we would get much more information from the advertiser, but just looking at the results that the advertiser is touting here, it looks like instead of what you would think of as a consumer perception study, there was just a survey that was done at the end of this clinical on 30 subjects after 4 weeks of use. And then the advertiser is calling that a consumer perception study. And the thought is maybe this was done in one location. And I think there's concerns that NAD would have there with this specific type of consumer perception study if it was conducted in that way. So lots of questions, but these are just, so, it's important for us to just kind of point out these issues and let you know the things that, we're seeing and that we would be concerned about. We will move on to, there's just some key principles that claims that convey a message that are objectifiably verifiable should be substantiated with objective testing. It's very important difference. I think it's very important in the beauty industry. Sometimes people do subjective claims or sensory claims are very important, but you just have to make sure that you're correctly making them and then supporting them with the correct type of, of substantiation. So sensory claims convey messages about individuals reacting to, perceiving, sensing products, and it would be acceptable to support those with sensory testing or consumer opinion testing that is properly conducted, of course. We have a quick case example here, Smile Direct Club. Nancy, do you want to take us through this quick?
Let me go really quickly. I kind of love this case because it illustrates so much of what we're talking about. And unfortunately for Smile Direct, you've already mentioned another one of their cases, but here they claim that they're fast dissolving white strips, which apparently dissolved in 15 minutes, whitened teeth, both 2 times whiter, 2 times faster than competing Crest white strips, which by the way, you leave on for 30 minutes for 7 days or whatever the instructions say. And it tried to prove its claims with confidentially submitted testing, something that Jen referenced. NAD got to see it. The challenger really didn't. And I just want to put in a plug for put your testing in. You're not going to get a great result if the challenger never gets an opportunity to give it its critique so that NAD can benefit from that critique as well. There's a natural disinclination in NAD to accept the testing if you don't want to let the challenger see it and you don't have good reasons to withhold it for truly proprietary reasons. But that's my own little pet peeve. In any case, these are the types of claims that have to be objectively verified. And NAD agreed. 2 times whiter was not a sensory performance claim, but the advertiser used consumer perception evidence, an at-home use test where consumers were given a card with a grading card, not even one that was used traditionally in the industry, and said, hey, how many levels whiter are your teeth? The NAD said that isn't good enough. This can be objectively verified. We really can't. Different lighting, different experiences, different consumers, different starting points. Who the heck knows? And NAD further said that the 2 times whiter, 2 times faster claim was tied. There was no head-to-head testing. That 2 times faster was just based on a dissolution test showing that their strips dissolved in 15 minutes. And that wasn't what the claim was about. The claim wasn't that if you could used it for 15 minutes and you used theirs for 30 minutes, a use claim. It was actually that you'd be 2 times whiter, 2 times faster. So in that 15 minutes, you'd still be 2 times whiter than the Crest white strips left you. There were some other oddities as well, but we don't have time to go into them. But I do want to point out, the more variable your data is, and that would be the case with a tooth whitening claim, the larger the sample population needs to be in your study. So just bear that in mind.
Good point. Okay, we're going to do this quickly. Comparison to medical procedures. Sarah, I'm throwing this first one to you.
And I can, we can cover this quickly. Couple of claims here. See results in minutes, lasts up to 6 hours. But then below we have, for those who don't want painful surgery or injections. So there's this arguable comparison to medical procedure. And it says it'll give you rapid results in minutes, but actually it's going to be for 6 hours, according to this claim, if it's accurate. So this is a comparison. You should have evidence to support it. It sounds like it's going to be difficult to support if it's only 6 hours. It says it visibly reduces under eye puffiness and wrinkles in minutes. Again, how long is that? Is it just 6 hours? And here we have a beautiful model with perfect skin. And that's going to be considered part of the claim as well. Plus she's pretty young. So, as far as the audience for this product, thinking through, who that audience is based on this picture and who you're trying to attract, and then what the actual testing data that you have and the age of that audience as well.
That's great. I think that there could be a decent argument here that maybe the comparison is only made, it just focuses on the attribute of, avoiding the pain of surgery. And that maybe you could get away with saying that that's the only comparison made here, and that it's very clear. The advertiser makes it clear, I don't know, very clear, but makes it clear that the cream only lasts for up to 6 hours. So it's not necessarily saying that there's, a comparison in results. I think this really walks the line. But Nancy, let me throw you this one. A little more of an extreme example.
You all heard it here. NAD gets that you can walk the line, talk the talk, and succeed, but not if you do it this way. So what does this one say? This one says flat out, smooths under eye wrinkles, reduces bags. So there's no need for painful surgery or injections. This is a test. This is a direct comparison between surgery and the product. You need head-to-head testing, which no one's going to have, that demonstrates that you're going to get comparable results between the surgical or other cosmetic procedure and the cream that you've just slathered on your skin. I've never seen that support. Neither has NAD. They've looked at claims, results as good as Botox, only faster, and they haven't yet worked. This is not likely to work either.
Yes. We'll talk very quickly about this case example. Nancy, I
Sure.
believe.
I think
Sarah.
this is me,
Sarah.
actually. Yeah,
sorry.
and essentially the claim is here. It's a lot of words, but essentially it's saying that the therapy that you get from this product is the same as anti-aging red light treatment. And it's a good case just to highlight essentially what we've been talking about throughout this entire program, which is that the testing data that they actually had to support this claim was not a head-to-head comparative testing. It was independent monadic test of the product. It was evidence about wavelength therapy and charts that were put forward, but they weren't actual comparisons with the conditions that can be replicated here between two different products. So it's a good example of Nancy and I were working on this one, we wouldn't have let the comparison fly with simple testing just on the product itself. Even if that testing says the product's great and it does all of these things, and you can line those things up with what anti-aging red light treatment does. If you're not actually testing the product on people in head-to-head testing, it's going to be very difficult to support that comparative claim. And I think with that, we can skip. I think this was 2 slides, but we can skip the next one because
And while you're skipping, I just want to say, you can make strong claims for your product when it works. Yeah. Sometimes everyone is so wedded to going too far that you actually lose the forest for the trees. There were lots of great things to say about that product, just not what they said.
Yep, exactly right.
Again, whether it's a good fit, that's what it matters. That's what matters, right? Whether your evidence is a good fit with your claim. Okay, so this is our last sort of topic we've identified that we see a lot of in the beauty industry. This also applies to product demonstrations, but we see a lot of before and after photos. It's common to show in the beauty industry either results from makeup application or results from a product's use. It's important to note that these before and after photos are in and of themselves product performance claims, and they must be substantiated. So let's look at this hypothetical ad briefly. Visibly, so the ad is to the right. I'm just giving you the advertiser's evidence on the left. Visibly reduces dark spots and fine lines and wrinkles. There's a before and it's after 2 weeks of use. The advertiser's support is a home use test of 200 users geographically dispersed over the US. All users were given a survey, and after 2 weeks of use, 90% of them said that they saw a reduction in dark spots and wrinkles. Respondents were asked to take before and after pictures. This picture is an actual before and after picture, and the user submitted an affidavit, said, I did nothing to alter this picture. So Nancy, is the affidavit alone, we get this a lot, is the affidavit alone enough to support this before and after picture?
In this instance, there's so much wrong, I don't know where to begin, but the answer is no. So you can't use before and after pictures that came from the consumer to support the dark spot, fine line, and wrinkle claim. There's so many reasons. We have no idea what we're looking at. We don't know if it's representative. We don't know what the lighting was. We don't know if they're wearing makeup. We have no idea. The fact that they said it's real is really just insufficient. And a dark spot and fine line and wrinkle reduction claim in any case requires objective proof. So unless you're talking about a different kind of claim, your home use, I realize we're at the end of time, so unless we're requiring a home use, unless you're talking about claims about what a consumer is seeing and feeling, you can't use a home use test like this. It's just not going to work. It's all the issues we saw before and we've been discussing, and Sarah and I just mentioned. What are your demographics? What's your expert grading? Were lines and spots measured at baseline and then compared thereafter? What other instructions were people given? I mean, they can go home and use a product for 14 days, just don't do the measurement at home. Do it in the lab. Was there a washout period? Did the study standardize the other products? What were the range of results? Did everybody have a consumer meaningful or relevant result? You need a whole kind of breakdown. It's not enough to just say there was a reduction in dark spots and wrinkles. What does that mean? So the number of questions that arise from something like this is huge and broad, and it's everything we've been talking about for the last 25 slides an hour. So we could spend it like this too, another 2 hours on it. Unfortunately, we don't have it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'll just say, and it's material. This is so very material to the purchasing decision. Before and after photos are very compelling, making sure you have strong evidence to support, and avoiding photoshopping, again, because it is material. You can Photoshop, to Nancy's first point about the ice cream and the mashed potatoes. If you're not advertising or touting something and you're photoshopping another aspect, that's something that we can discuss. But if you're photoshopping to display what you're promoting, it's going to be a problem. That's material and misleading. So we're back in the world of deception.
And can you tell me the name of the product? Because I want to buy it.
I know. It makes me look like that.
Have.
So these are the key principles. We're out of time, so we don't need to talk about them. This was a case example that we really talked about before, and Sarah had mentioned before and after photo was used here, and the NAD found that it was not allowed because the support that the advertiser gave was not acceptable. And then we have some best practices here. I think we're out of time, so I think that we will leave you to this slide and the next slide, 2 best practices. Do you have any closing remarks, Nancy or Sarah?
I actually just want to let everyone know that the video and the presentation will be available. So you'll have all of this. You can watch the video. Since we gave you so much information so quickly, you'll want to watch it again 2, 3, 4, 5 times. We understand. And you can read all of the slides and the best practices. And I think they're pretty self-evident. And my closing comment is simply, really think about your claims, really think about your support, make sure it fits, and get all the right players involved at the beginning, not at the end. And whether that's your lawyers and your scientists and your marketers and R&D, get everybody in the same room and work it through at the beginning. It's a lot easier than trying to fix it when it's all said and done.
And to second that, I would say context matters. So even if you have all those people in the room with the claims, make sure you have the photos, the packaging, how you want to use it. At the end of the day, one claim that all these people have cleared can be entirely turned on his head with the wrong photo.
Good points. Okay, I'd like to thank Nancy and Sarah for their time and for discussing these important substantiation issues that advertisers in the beauty industry often face. Thank you to all of you for attending during your busy day. If this enticed you and you'd like to learn more about cutting-edge advertising law topics, please join us for our NAD conference on September 19th and 20th in Philadelphia. We have an exciting agenda planned with expert panelists in all areas of advertising law. So we look forward to seeing you in a few months. Take care.